Another name given to America is incarceration nation because we put more people in prison than other countries around the world. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics.gov, the number of sentenced prisoners under the jurisdiction of state or federal correctional authority has increased from 294,396 in 1978 to 1,334,174 in 2000. That's more than 1 million more people incarcerated within a 22-year difference. And then it's increased to 1,476,847 in 2015. They also state in a press release that about 3 out of 10 federal prisoners released to a term of community service returned to prison within 5 years, and nearly 6 out of 10 state prisoners conditionally released returned in 5 years. So really, is prison doing anything good for us? Is the idea of incarcerating so many people actually benefiting our community? That's the real question that I think faces a lot of criminologists. That is a real problem, because if we're having all these people be put away into jail or prison for a long amount of time, and we're putting our tax dollars into it, we want it to be actually beneficial for the community rather than more punishment for us. So what mass incarceration does is it leads to high expenses, and it really doesn't work from what we've found, starting from that statistic I gave you, that 3 out of 10 federal prisoners come back in 5 years, and 6 out of 10 state come back in 5 years. We've also have changed our focus from being a rehab focus into more of a revenge focus. So instead of sending people to prison in order to improve their behavior, we're sending them to prison just kind of to put them there and not have them in society. It's a lot like grounding when you're a child, and even with children that doesn't always work. A lot of times it repeats itself, I mean, a child does something and then they get grounded, and then a lot of the times the action happens again. So that's why we kind of question if it works as an adult. So to begin, one of the biggest problems with incarceration being incarceration nation is the expense associated with it. I had read an article called Assessing the Effects of Mass Incarceration on Informed Social Reinvestment in the Community. They stated that research suggests that incarcerating individuals can have negative consequences for the future individuals, such as their future labor participation and future earnings. So what happens is we put these people into jail for however long, whether it be a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. A lot of the times they can't keep their job when they get out. So then they have to find a new job. Well, most people don't want to hire a criminal. So once we've done that to them, all of a sudden they come back into society. We've invested our money into them in jail, but then we also have to put money towards them because they get things such as unemployment because they can't get employed. Employers don't want them to work for them, or once again, future earnings. So they really just can't get a job that lets them earn enough money to survive the life that they'd like to live, which I understand is somewhat associated with a punishment, but at the same time, is it really fair to them if it was a nonviolent crime? The other thing is that taxpayer dollars go towards staffing the prison, food, rehab services, the facility itself that already exists, and often new facilities, because we've gotten to a point where there's overcrowding in prisons, and so they're building more of them. And our taxpayer dollars are going towards these more and more prisons, and eventually the prisons are going to take over the population. A lot of the times people are saying that the prison nation is a nation within itself because there's just so many people who are a part of it. So we're creating a whole new community, basically, that's all prisons. And once again, if people aren't committing that horrible of crimes, then do we really need to have them there is one of the questions. So then once again, going towards the other issue with it is, does this system really work? I read another article called Prosecutors Seeks Alternatives to Incarceration by Charles J. Hynes. That states that the number of women incarcerated between 1985 and 1995 actually tripled, and it probably has increased ever since then as well. It's just that was the statistics they gave me. And the biggest problem with that is that often women are often mothers. So a lot of the times the abrupt and prolonged, this is from the article, the prolonged and abrupt separation of mother and child leads to foster care and delinquency, because what happens is the child feels that the mother abandoned them and often wants to basically be revengeful, but not always towards the mom. They don't always find that it's the mom's fault. They want to blame the system. So they're like, oh, if my mom does something bad, then why can't I do something bad? And you're just going to punish me anyway. This also goes towards what we had read in our Pearson Revel book. It states that, here we go, 59% of behavioral problems come from environmental rather than genetic factors, as shown in the meta-analysis that was done on twins. So they did tests on twins where one twin would be treated very well and always given attention, and the other one wasn't. And a lot of the times the one who wasn't given as much attention was more delinquent. So that's what happens in these situations too, because when the mom is gone so long, the child often has to either go to foster care or is being taken care of someone who isn't a direct parent. And this isn't saying that fathers can't play that role, but also stated in our Pearson book, women often feel the need to nurture. So it's not that guys can't nurture, it's that women more thrive off of that and feel the need to fulfill it more often than a father role would. Another problem with this system is a lot of why people do things they do is because they're hanging around the wrong people. So then when they get out on, whether it be parole, probation, everything, the whole rule is to not hang around people who are bad influences. But when we're putting people who are nonviolent into prison, we're putting them around the wrong people. And then they get worse ideas. And a lot of times this leads to worse crimes. For instance, if someone came in for drugs and all they had done is, say, smoked weed. So if they've done that, then they go into prison. All of a sudden, they're in communication with people who regularly steal. And so the people who know how to steal teach them how to steal. And this, all of a sudden, bad behavior is influenced on them and they get back out and they want to smoke again. However, they might not have the money to, once again, because they can't get a job. So that leads them to steal. And all of a sudden, it's a worse crime than originally committed. Not saying that drugs are okay, but if the original problem was drugs and now we have stealing and drugs together, that's a worse problem, and we really haven't fixed anything. Also, according to America, the Prison Nation, Melding humanistic jurisprudence with a value-centric incarceration model by Sabi Ghoshray, many states have stripped parole boards' authority and instead just made it a more predominant focus on longer sentences that are fixed. So you can't, for instance, a lot of the times right now, what you have is there's a thing called good time. So if you behave well in prison or on, say, parole, probation, whatever, your sentence is often shortened. But these people are saying, we don't want that. We want to just make people stay there full time, and we're going to make it a longer sentence. So what ends up happening then is these people in jail, they don't find a need to behave any better because there's no benefit to it. Why would you behave better if you don't get any results? So this results in longer incarceration for nonviolent crime as well as an increased incarceration population. The last thing by that article states that in short-term, incarceration may have the power to convince a potential offender not to commit a crime, but it is the long-term beneficial impact to society that has been challenged by social research. So once again, these people are coming back into society. When they're gone, yeah, the problem's temporarily gone, but as soon as they come back, problems are often worsened. So is it really doing anything good for us to just put the problem aside for a little bit just to let them back out? Because we no longer focus on rehab. For this reason, I think that things we should do to improve the system are, one, focus more on rehab rather than just punishment. So instead of saying, we're going to lock you up for doing your crime, we want to improve your behavior. We want to show you better habits and things of that nature. Another thing I think is more punishment in society rather than in prisons. Once again, if it's a violent crime, no, we want to have them kind of more out of the community. But if they're not affecting others, then I think that it's okay for them to be part of society still. And that way they can keep jobs and financial stability and things of that nature. My last recommendation would be shock therapy. So a lot of people if they're nonviolent, usually it's their first offense. So if you put them in jail for even just a night or a week, often that's enough to scare them to not want to be there. But once we're putting them in there for longer times, that's when they're learning the system and almost getting comfortable in it. So I think that's one of the biggest things we need to focus on in criminology right now. And I hope you all have a great day.